There is a prayer that many people whisper to God without realizing how dangerous it can be. It sounds sincere. It sounds hopeful. It sounds completely harmless. But sometimes, it is the very prayer that could lead someone down the wrong path. Think about this for a moment. How many times have you prayed for something with complete certainty that it was right? A relationship you believed was meant to last forever. A job opportunity you were convinced would change your life. A door you desperately wanted God to open. You prayed about it. You believed in it. You asked God to make it happen. And when it didn't happen, it hurt. It felt confusing. It felt unfair. It felt like your prayers were being ignored. But what if the very thing you begged God for was the exact thing that could have taken your life in the wrong direction? What if the opportunity you prayed for would have placed you in the wrong environment? What if the relationship you fought so hard to keep would have slowly destroyed your peace? What if the door you tried to force open would have led you somewhere you were never meant to go? Here is something many people struggle to understand. Not every unanswered prayer is a rejection. Sometimes an unanswered prayer is protection. Because God sees something we cannot see. He sees the future consequences of the decisions we are trying to make today. He sees the people who will eventually hurt us. He sees the situations that will quietly pull us away from the life we were meant to live. And sometimes, out of love, He simply says no, even when we beg Him to say yes, even when we believe we are ready, even when we think we know exactly what we need. There are prayers that feel good to say, but answering them too soon could change everything in ways we would regret. And in this message, we are going to explore something that may completely change the way you see prayer. Because some of the greatest blessings in your life may not be the prayers God answered, but the prayers He refused to answer. One of the biggest reasons people pray for the wrong things is emotion. When emotions are strong, our judgment becomes weaker. In those moments, something can feel absolutely right, even if it is not. A relationship can feel perfect simply because we do not want to be alone. An opportunity can feel like a miracle simply because we are tired of waiting. A decision can feel like destiny simply because it appeared at the right moment. But emotions have a powerful way of convincing us that something temporary is permanent. And when that happens, our prayers often become emotional requests rather than wise ones. We begin asking God to confirm something we already decided in our hearts. Instead of asking for guidance, we ask for approval. Instead of asking God to show us the right path, we ask Him to bless the path we have already chosen. And this happens more often than people realize. Someone meets a person they feel strongly about and immediately begins praying that the relationship will work. Someone sees a new opportunity and instantly begins praying that God will open that door. Someone faces a difficult situation and prays for the fastest escape possible. But emotions rarely see the full picture. They only see the moment. God, however, sees the road ahead. He sees where that relationship may eventually lead. He sees the hidden consequences of that opportunity. He sees the long-term impact of decisions that right now seem harmless. And sometimes the most loving thing God can do is refuse the prayer we are making in that emotional moment. Because what we are asking for might solve today's feelings, but create tomorrow's problems. There are countless stories of people who once prayed desperately for something, only to realize years later that receiving it would have changed their life in ways they never wanted. And that realization leads to a powerful truth. Sometimes the greatest evidence of God's protection is not what He gives you. It is what He refuses to give you. One of the most difficult things for any human being to accept is that we do not see the full picture of our lives. We see the present moment. We see the opportunity in front of us. We see the person standing beside us. We see the door that looks promising. But what we cannot see is where that door will eventually lead. That is where the difference between human understanding and God's wisdom becomes clear. Because while we are looking at the present moment, God is already looking at the future. He sees what will happen next year. He sees what will happen 5 years from now. He sees the consequences of decisions that seem small today but may shape the rest of our lives. And because He sees what we cannot see, the answer to some prayers must be no. Not because the prayer is wrong in our eyes, but because the outcome would not lead us where we were meant to go. Think about how often people ask God for something that seems good on the surface. A job that promises more money. A relationship that feels exciting. An opportunity that appears to solve many problems. From a human perspective, these things can look like blessings. But what if that job slowly pulls you away from the people who matter most in your life? What if that relationship eventually becomes a source of constant pain? What if that opportunity leads you into an environment that quietly changes who you are becoming? These are the things we cannot see in the moment, but God can. That is why sometimes the door you want so badly remains closed. And at first, that closed door feels like disappointment. It feels like a missed opportunity. It feels like something important was taken away from you. But time has a way of revealing things we could never understand in the beginning. Years later, many people look back and realize that the door they once begged God to open would have led them somewhere they never wanted to go. They realize that the relationship they tried so hard to hold on to would have changed them in ways they never expected. They realize that the opportunity they once believed was perfect would have placed them in the wrong place at the wrong time. And suddenly the unanswered prayer makes sense. What once felt like rejection becomes protection. What once felt like silence becomes guidance. Because sometimes the greatest mercy God can show us is preventing us from walking down the wrong road. There is a powerful truth hidden inside this idea. God does not simply respond to the moment we are living in. He responds to the life we are becoming. He is not only concerned with what we want today, He is concerned with where we will end up tomorrow. And that is why some prayers are not answered the way we expect. It is not because God does not hear us. It is not because our prayers are unimportant. It is because the future we cannot see matters more than the moment we are experiencing right now. Imagine if every prayer you ever made had been answered exactly the way you asked. Every relationship you wanted would have remained. Every opportunity you desired would have opened. Every door you pushed would have moved. At first, that may sound wonderful. But when you look deeper, it may not be. Because some of those doors might have taken you far away from the life you were meant to live. Some of those relationships might have slowly damaged your peace. Some of those opportunities might have distracted you from the purpose you were meant to pursue. And that is why wisdom often arrives later than we expect. In the moment, we see a closed door and feel disappointment. Years later, we see the same moment and feel gratitude. Because the path we eventually walked turned out to be far better than the one we were asking for. And that realization changes the way we see unanswered prayers. Instead of seeing them as loss, we begin to see them as guidance. Instead of seeing them as rejection, we begin to see them as protection. Because the truth is simple. God is not just answering prayers. He is shaping the direction of a life. And sometimes that direction requires certain prayers to remain unanswered. There is a moment that many people experience later in life. A moment where they stop and think about the past and suddenly realize something shocking. There was a time when they prayed desperately for something. They begged God for it. They believed it was the answer to everything. But now, looking back years later, they realize something surprising. If that prayer had been answered, their life might have gone in a completely different direction, and not a better one. Think about how many people once prayed for a relationship that felt perfect at the beginning. They were convinced that person was the one. They prayed for the relationship to work. They prayed that nothing would separate them. But over time, the truth became clearer. The relationship that once felt exciting slowly revealed deeper problems. Different values, different priorities, different visions for the future. If that relationship had continued, it might have brought years of conflict and emotional exhaustion. But when the relationship ended, it felt like heartbreak. At the time, it felt like losing something precious. Yet later, many people realized that losing that relationship was actually one of the best things that ever happened to them. The same pattern appears in other parts of life. Someone once prayed desperately for a certain job. It looked like the opportunity of a lifetime. Higher income, prestige, success. But sometimes the job that appears perfect on the outside can slowly drain the joy out of a person's life. Long hours, constant stress, a toxic environment, little time for family, little time for peace. And when that opportunity never arrives, it can feel like failure. But later, when a different path opens, the person realizes something important. The job they once prayed for might have taken them away from the life they truly wanted. This pattern repeats itself in many forms. The door you tried to force open, the opportunity you begged God to create, the situation you believed was absolutely necessary for your happiness. Yet the longer life unfolds, the clearer something becomes. Sometimes the prayer we are most passionate about is the one that would have changed our life in the wrong way. Because passion does not always equal wisdom. Strong desire does not always equal the right direction. And this is why faith sometimes requires trusting a no from God. Not every no is a punishment. Sometimes it is protection from consequences we cannot yet imagine. God sees how certain paths will shape our character. He sees how certain environments will influence who we become. He sees the people we will meet and the people who may hurt us. He sees the pressures that might slowly change our priorities. And because he sees the full story, his response is sometimes very different from what we expect. There are prayers that feel urgent in the moment. Prayers that feel absolutely necessary. Prayers we believe must be answered immediately. But the truth is that life is long, and the direction of a life matters more than the emotion of a moment. That is why some doors remain closed no matter how hard we knock. And while it may feel painful at first, that closed door may quietly be saving us from a future we would regret. Because one of the most dangerous things that can happen to a person is receiving exactly what they asked for at the wrong time. And sometimes the greatest blessing God can give is simply refusing to answer a prayer that would have changed everything for the worse. When a prayer goes unanswered, the first reaction many people feel is disappointment. You may begin to wonder if you did something wrong. Maybe you did not pray enough. Maybe your faith was not strong enough. Maybe God simply chose not to listen. But that way of thinking misses something important about how God works in our lives. Because a no from God is rarely the end of the story. In fact, it is often the beginning of a different path. A path you could not see while you were focused on the thing you wanted so badly. Think about how many times in life people become completely focused on one specific outcome. One opportunity, one relationship, one direction. It becomes the center of their hopes. They begin to believe that everything depends on that one thing happening. And when it does not happen, the disappointment can feel overwhelming. But life rarely moves in straight lines. Very often, the moment that feels like a setback becomes the moment that quietly redirects everything. A closed door forces you to look somewhere else. A failed plan pushes you toward a different opportunity. An unanswered prayer leaves space for something unexpected to enter your life. And many times, those unexpected paths lead to places far better than the one you were chasing before. The difficulty is that we usually cannot see that in the moment. In the moment, we only see the loss. We only see the door that did not open. We only see the prayer that was not answered. But time has a powerful way of changing perspective. Months later, or years later, the same moment begins to look different. You realize that the opportunity you lost made room for another opportunity you would never have considered. You realize that the relationship that ended created space for someone far better suited for your life. You realize that the door that remained closed pushed you toward a path that eventually brought far more peace and fulfillment. And suddenly, what once looked like rejection begins to look like guidance. What once looked like disappointment begins to look like protection. Because God's purpose is not simply to make our lives easier in the short term. His purpose is to guide our lives toward the right direction over the long term. That direction may involve detours. It may involve delays. It may involve moments where things do not make sense at all. But those moments are often shaping something deeper inside us. They are building patience. They are building wisdom. They are building the ability to trust even when the outcome is uncertain. And sometimes, the prayer that God does not answer today becomes the reason your life moves towards something better tomorrow. So when a prayer remains unanswered, it does not mean that God has abandoned your story. It may simply mean that the story is still unfolding, and the path ahead may lead somewhere far greater than the place you were asking to go. There is something many people only realize much later in life. When you are young, you believe the greatest blessings are the prayers that get answered. You believe the doors that open are the ones that change everything. You believe the opportunities you receive are the proof that God is guiding your life. And sometimes that is true. But as time passes, something interesting begins to happen. You start remembering the prayers that were never answered, the opportunities that never appeared, the doors that never opened. And slowly, a different understanding begins to form. Because when you look back at your life from a distance, you begin to see something you could not see in the moment. Some of the prayers you once cried over might have completely changed your life in ways you would never want today. That relationship you begged God to save, that opportunity you thought was perfect, that path you believed was meant for you. At the time, losing those things felt painful. It felt confusing. It felt like something important was being taken away. But life has a way of revealing the truth over time. Years later, you might meet someone who shows you what a healthy relationship truly looks like. And suddenly you realize that the relationship you once prayed to keep would have kept you trapped in something far less meaningful. Or you might discover a different career, a different direction, a different purpose that brings far more fulfillment than the opportunity you once chased. And in those moments, a strange feeling appears. Gratitude. Gratitude not just for the prayers that were answered, but for the prayers that were never answered at all. Because those unanswered prayers quietly redirected your life. They prevented certain paths from opening. They stopped certain situations from unfolding. They guided you away from futures that might have slowly taken you further from the person you were meant to become. This is one of the most powerful truths about faith. God's guidance is not only visible in the things He gives you, it is also visible in the things He withholds, in the doors He keeps closed, in the opportunities that never appear, in the plans that somehow fall apart. Because sometimes protection does not feel like protection in the moment. Sometimes protection feels like disappointment. Sometimes protection feels like silence. Sometimes protection feels like a prayer that was never answered. But later, when the years have passed and the pieces of your life begin to make sense, you may discover something that changes the way you see those moments forever. You may realize that some of the greatest blessings in your life were not the things God gave you. They were the things He refused to give you. The prayers that quietly saved you from the wrong road. The prayers that kept you from walking into something that looked right, but would have led you somewhere you never wanted to go. And that realization changes everything. Because once you understand this, you begin to pray differently. You stop asking only for the things you want, and you start asking for something far greater. You begin asking God to guide your life, even if that guidance sometimes means saying no. Even if that guidance means closing doors you once wanted open. Even if that guidance means allowing certain plans to fall apart. Because when you trust that God sees the future you cannot see, even an unanswered prayer can become a sign that your life is still being carefully guided. And sometimes the greatest evidence that God is protecting your life is the prayer He chose not to answer.